And we are back for prepping for winter with the Mercy sample chapter. Arya is in Braavos, having awoken from a wolf dream where she was on the hunt, and now she is wearing a new identity, Mercy, a mummer, though this identity is full of signals from Arya's past. The night is foggy, perhaps emboldening Arya as she journeys to a theater where a bloody hand, or a werewood hand, has been painted on this unstable building. And now let's continue. Mercy found the company assembled behind the stage and slipped in between Dana and the snapper at the back, hoping her late arrival would go unnoticed. Isambaro was telling everyone that he expected the gate to be packed to the rafters this evening, despite the fog. "The King of Westeros is sending his envoy to do homage to the King of the Mummers tonight," he told his troop. "We will not disappoint our fellow monarch." And here Arya slips between her two friends in the company, Dana and the Snapper. As I mentioned previously, the Snapper seems to be a stand-in for Septim Dane, and Dana a stand-in for Sansa in Arya's life. The Snapper being a tough old lady who teaches Arya to sew, and Dana being a slightly older girl who's a bit snobby and apt to give advice, and who is likely playing Sansa in the show. Now Arya hopes that her lateness will go unnoticed, though considering that Big Brusco told us that Isambaro had been asking about Mercy, and considering later Bobono also makes reference to Arya's lateness, this seems rather unlikely. And so we do seem to have a disparity between how invisible Arya thinks she is versus how invisible she actually is. As I talked about last time, the fog has made Arya think that her crimes will go unnoticed. Whether this is actually true is unknown. Now, Isambaro tells us, half-jokingly I imagine, that the King of Westeros has sent his envoy to do homage to the King of Mummers. This is of course not really what's happening. Yes, King's Landing has sent an envoy, Harry Swift, to Braavos, but the reason is to negotiate with the Iron Bank. Attending this play seems to be some sort of polite entertainment given before or during negotiations. Isambaro is stretching the word homage, which can simply mean to pay respect to. And since the envoy is attending the play, he is, in a way, paying respect to the theater. But the underlying politics of Isambaro's statement are a bit more interesting. Since the envoy is Harry Swift, we know that the king that Isambaro speaks of is Tommen, though we aren't certain who is acting as regent for him. At this point, Kevin Lannister has been murdered in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, but based on some later comments by characters, the regent seems to be Cersei again, having survived her trial. What is striking is that Isambaro recognizes Tommen as king, and not, say, Aegon or Stannis. We know that the Iron Bank negotiated with Stannis, and Tycho Nestoris put his own life in a bit of peril to give him a loan, and thus either the Iron Bank's support for Stannis is a secret, or news from the Pink Letter claiming that Stannis has been defeated has made its way back to Braavos. Isambaro's statements also mean that either Aegon has not conquered King's Landing yet, or at least news of this conquest has not reached Braavos. "We," said the Snapper, who did all the costumes for the mummers. "Is there more than one of him now?" "He's fat enough to count for two," whispered Bobono. Every mummer's troop had to have a dwarf. He was theirs. When he saw Mercy, he gave her a leer. "Aho!" he said. "There she is. Is the little girl all ready for her rape?" He smacked his lips. The Snapper smacked him in the head. "Be quiet." So here the Snapper mocks Isambaro for using the royal we. For some reason, monarchs and publications speak of themselves in the first person plural. Isambaro, being the king of the mummers, feels that he should speak this way as well. However, Isambaro being plural may be another parallel to Isambaro being like Bloodraven or the Children of the Forest. Bloodraven and the Children are part of the werewood net and thus part of a collective. In fact, the Children of the Forest always speak of themselves as we, though Bloodraven himself does use I. Our author has actually written a number of science fiction and horror stories based on the idea of collective consciousness, and it's really a go-to concept for him. Anyway, Bobono the dwarf then joins in the mockery, calling Isambaro fat. Now, Isambaro being fat does make one wonder if he is one and the same as a different member of the House of Black and White, nicknamed by Arya the Fat Fellow. The Fat Fellow is an agent who would visit the House of Black and White frequently, so he seems to be rather important. Unfortunately, we don't have too much else to go on, other than him being fat. Arya never makes a connection between him and Isambaro, but it may be because she's playing Mercy. We know that the Fat Fellow has stern eyes, a hook nose, and yellow teeth, but we have no idea what Isambaro looks like, so who knows. Now we are introduced to Bobono, the dwarf actor in the play, who is playing Tyrion, and we can see that Bobono is a character who likes being shocking, asking an 11-year-old if she's ready to be raped. Bobono being shocking and the Mummers troupe accepting this behavior does highlight how odd it is that Penny plays such a shy and innocent girl, especially considering she was in a routine with simulated sex. Anyway, Arya mentions that all Mummers troops in Braavos have dwarfs, and this is actually a callback to A Feast for Crows when an informant tells Cersei that he saw a dwarf mummer in Braavos that he thought might be Tyrion. It's completely possible that the dwarf the informant saw was actually Bobono, so it's a bit ironic that Bobono is now playing Tyrion, the person he was mistaken for. The king of the Mummers ignored the brief commotion. He was still talking, telling the Mummers how magnificent they must be. Besides the Westerosi envoy, there would be keyholders in the crowd this evening, and famous courtesans as well. He did not intend for them to leave with a poor opinion of the gate. "It shall go ill for any man who fails me," he promised, a threat he borrowed from the speech Prince Garin gives on the eve of battle in Wrath of the Dragon Lords, Ferio Farrell's first play. And so here we find that besides the Westerosi envoy, Harry Swift, other important people will be in the crowd. Keyholders and courtesans. So, about these keyholders. Now, we don't have any knowledge about keyholders from anywhere in the main series, but we do get quite a bit on them from the world of Ice and Fire. The keyholders are said to be the Iron Bank shareholders, and the descendants of the original 23 founders of the Iron Bank. These descendant keyholders now number about 1,000. There are likely still 23 keys out there for the 23 founders, and these keys originally opened the subterranean vaults to the Iron Bank. Today, only a limited number of families have these keys, and they are kept and revered much like Valyrian steel swords are in Westeros. So Braavos is a democracy, and the keyholders, along with some magisters and some other shareholders in the bank, elect the Sea Lord of Braavos when the previous one dies. It seems that the powers in Braavos are actually rather unified in the sense that the rich families have shares in the Iron Bank and elect the Sea Lord. Thus, the Sea Lord would naturally represent those families and in turn have interest in the Iron Bank. In fact, it appears that the current Sea Lord of Braavos, Ferrego and Tyrion, is almost certainly a keyholder himself. We know this because Arya passes the Tower of Antirion among other towers, and these towers are called the Towers of the Keyholders in the world of Ice and Fire. We should remember that the current Sea Lord, Ferrego Antirion, is sick, so the importance of the keyholders right now is a bit elevated, and we should remember that the House of Black and White was very interested in the upcoming election. Now, as I said, the keyholders are shareholders of the Iron Bank, so the keyholders who are attending the gate this evening are likely part of the negotiations with Harry Swift. In fact, Swift's visit is paralleled with another moment in history. During the First Blackfire Rebellion, King Daeron II sent his in-law, Michael Manwoody, to negotiate with the keyholders of the Iron Bank. This was during the First Blackfire Rebellion, so apparently Daeron needed some money for his war. Here, Kevin Lannister, or perhaps Cersei, has sent their in-law, Harry Swift, Harry's is Kevin's father-in-law and Lancel's grandfather, to negotiate with the Iron Bank to finance their war as well. Now, on courtesans. So, Braavos is a city where very talented sex workers can make quite a bit of money and rise to noble positions. And while this may seem odd at first, we should remember that in our world, athletes and all sorts of individuals with specialized talents can become millionaires. Now, George R.R. Martin does like to make various points about human perceptions of sex. The Myronese view sex as spiritual, the Summer Islanders celebrate sex, and here in Braavos, sex is a praised art form. This is all meant to contrast the regressive Westerosi attitudes about sex and our Western society as well. Now, a rather relevant conversation about sex comes in Samwell 4, A Feast for Crows, when Koja asks why a god would give one genitalia only to command them not to use it. Of course, a god didn't make those rules, humans did. And the reason why extramarital sex is frowned upon in Westeros is because the entire feudal structure is dependent on marriage alliances and inherited land. Of course, these rules of chastity mainly fall upon women, men are generally allowed to sow their oats, and it's women who have the diminished power in Westeros. At the end of the day, the point that our author is likely trying to make with the presence of courtesans in our story is that female sexuality is agency, power, and influence. And in Westeros, there's an active attempt to depower women by removing their sexuality. And notably, Arya, despite being 11, is learning to use sex as a form of power and influence in this chapter. She has perhaps been inspired by the courtesans. So we also hear of Isambaro quoting a line of Prince Garin from a play called Wrath of the Dragon Lords by Ferrio Farrell. Prince Garin was the Rhoynish leader who lost against the Valyrians, causing Nymeria and the Rhoynar to flee to Dorne. His men did fail him and likely died by dragonfire. Naturally, a play starring Garin as a protagonist would be rather anti-Valyrian and anti-dragon, which the Braavosi appear to generally be. In fact, Tycho Nestoris actually uses the phrase Wrath of the Dragon Lords when scolding Jon about making jokes about dragons. By the time Isambaro finally finished speaking, less than an hour remained before the show, and the mummers were all frantic and fretful by turns. The gate rang to the sound of Mercy's name. "Mercy!" her friend Dana implored. "Lady Stork has stepped on the hem of her gown again. Come help me sew it up." So Isambaro finishes his speech, and the show is about to begin with everyone getting ready. Curiously, Isambaro doesn't go to see Arya before the show, despite asking about her earlier. We also find the cast of the play repeating the name Mercy, which on the one hand is Arya's name, but on the other hand reminds us of the other definition of mercy, murder. Over and over, the players of the show will call out murder. So first we find that Dana is helping Lady Stork with the hem of her gown. It seems that Dana also has the dual role of actress and costume repairer as Arya does. Now, Lady Stork seems to be playing the role of Cersei in the play. As we find out later, she's playing the Queen. Lady Stork repeatedly steps on the hem of her gown, tearing it, likely because she's running to her dying son Joffrey in the wedding scene. "Mercy," the stranger called. "Bring me the bloody paste. My horn is coming loose." "Mercy," boomed Isambaro the Great himself. "What have you done with my crown, girl? I cannot make my entrance without my crown. How shall they know that I'm a king?" "Mercy," squeaked the dwarf Bobono. "Mercy, something's amiss with my laces. My cock keeps flopping out." She fetched the sticky paste and fastened the stranger's left horn back onto his forehead. She found Isambaro's crown in the privy where he always left it and helped him pin it to his wig, and then ran for needle and thread so the snapper could sew the lace hem back onto the cloth and gold gown that the queen would wear in the wedding scene. So here the stranger calls out for mercy, though this is actually the mummer Morrow, who we met earlier, calling out for her. Morrow is playing the stranger, as the play seems to open with a scene between Tyrion and the stranger making a deal for the stranger to kill Robert. Of course, in Westerosi tradition, the stranger is seldom visualized, and when he is, he's usually portrayed as a shadow with starry eyes. But here in the play, this is what he looks like, a horned beast. This demonstrates firstly how inaccurately the Braavosi view the Westerosi, but also it shows how this play is a perverse representation of the events that actually happened. Next, Isambaro, who is clearly playing Robert, calls out for mercy to find his crown. He then asks rhetorically, "How shall they know that I'm a king?" So there's a bit to unpack with this statement by Isambaro. Of course, in a literal sense, it's difficult to recognize a king when he has no crown, as kings look like anyone else. Mance Rayder had no crown when Jon met him, and Jon failed to recognize he was a king. But the statement by Isambaro also touches on something deeper. Even when people have crowns, we don't know who the true king is. A sex worker once wore Robb Stark's crown, but she was hardly considered a real monarch. And of course, Westeros is currently at war with multiple people claiming to be king. How can you tell who the true one is? Well, it's likely as Varys says, power resides where men think it resides. And the Iron Bank certainly will have its say as well. These negotiations between Harry Swift and the Iron Bank will certainly touch on whether or not they recognize Tommen as king. Now, Bobono, who plays Tyrion, then calls out for mercy because his cock keeps falling out. We will speak in a moment about this cock, but it likely keeps falling out as a metaphor for Tyrion, whose matters of love and sex keep bringing him misfortune. Tyrion is depowered by his sexual desire that he cannot control. Arya then does her best to fix the problems that people have called out to her for, but notably does not sew the hem back on Lady Stork's dress, as Arya famously sews crooked stitches. And Bobono's cock was indeed flopping out. It was made to flop out, for the rape. What a hideous thing, Mercy thought as she knelt before the dwarf to fix him. The cock was a foot long, and as thick as her arm, big enough to be seen from the highest balcony. The dyer had done a poor job with the leather, though. The thing was a mottled pink and white, with a bulbous head the color of a plum. Mercy pushed it back into Bobono's breeches and laced him back up. So here we have Arya lacing up Bobono's breeches and putting his fake penis back inside them. And for a scene with a fake penis, there are quite a few parallels going on. So first of all, as we went over when we covered the Tyrion sample chapters, this scene directly mirrors what's going on with Tyrion outside of Meereen in the second Tyrion sample chapter. Arya, who plays Shae in the play, is kneeling and helping dress Bobono, who plays Tyrion, while over in Slaver's Bay, Penny is kneeling, helping dress the actual Tyrion, as he hallucinates and thinks Penny is Shae. Even in a temporal sense, the scenes are parallel. Bobono is about to begin Tyrion's adventures as Hand on stage, but as a prelude, Shae is dressing him, just as the real Shae dressed the real Tyrion at the Green Fork, a prelude to him being Hand. And Tyrion over in Meereen thinks back to Shae dressing him at the Green Fork when Penny is dressing him for battle. And the scenes parallel metaphorically as well. Tyrion in Slaver's Bay castigates himself for thinking with his cock, unable to control his sexual desires, and here Bobono's cock will not stay in his pants. He cannot control his penis. Not to mention, Bobono's fake cock is enormous, a giant's penis, which is what Shae would always insinuate about Tyrion's penis when she called Tyrion my giant. Shae was tapping into the stereotypical male insecurity of feeling their genitalia aren't large enough. With all of these parallels between Arya, Shae, and Penny, we do have to wonder about Penny's true nature. Arya is a mummer with sinister motives. Shae was effectively a mummer with sinister motives. And Penny is a mummer with unknown motives. What exactly is her game, and why is she even in Slaver's Bay? Oswell Kettleblack found Penny in Braavos. Does she also have a connection to the House of Black and White? Now, one interesting thing about the story that's being presented in this play is that it appears to largely come from the testimony at Tyrion's trial. Shae is the one that overtly claims that Tyrion hated his family and plotted to kill Joffrey, then Cersei, then his father, then Tommen. And she is the one who claimed she was a maiden raped by Tyrion. And Tyrion's confession in the end of his trial is to being a dwarf. Here in the play, we have Tyrion making a speech about how he's twisted on the outside and jealous of his family. And we know that later in the show, there is also a rape. But also at the trial, Shae went into detail about how Tyrion made her call his genitalia giant, which brought immense laughter from the crowd. And so the character of Tyrion, played by Bobono, having giant genitalia, seems to derive from that. And this is a good place to stop. We'll continue on in Mercy Part 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.